Snub nose 357 Magnum test, heavy versus light. And this is a video series I'm doing with Fud Martin, who's been a long-time supporter of my channel. And what we wanted to do here was to take something that is light 357 Magnum as far as bullet weight goes and compare it to something that's heavy. In my last video I did with this, I used the Remington XTP, and I got a lot of misunderstanding from that. A lot of people were saying, well, you used a 110 versus a 158 grain. You should have used this 180 grain or this 200 grain jacket of hollow point I've seen versus whatever. And the point that I'm making here is I'm doing these tests within the same ammo line, what variants they have within that have the same bullet style. And in the Remington HTP, it was a 158 grain semi-jacketed hollow point, the heaviest that comes in that, versus our 110 grain semi-jacketed hollow point. So the same thing's going on here with our Corbon. And what we have here is a 110 grain versus a 140 grain, the lightest versus the heaviest that they offer, and use the same bullet style. So these are XTP bullets. Our 110 grain is rated at 1,500 feet per second, so that's a very hot rating for a 110, because 110s are generally loaded a little bit lighter than typical. Versus our 140 grain, that's rated at 1,300 feet per second. So we're going to do this test through a 2-inch Taurus 605 here. I have my 4-inch barrel 686 here, because I want to fire a shot with one of these, of each of these, and see what our better potential is for velocity, and then see how it compares to our averages in our 2-inch barrel. So what Fud Martin really wanted to see was, you know, how much bullet impact and smack that hits on the block, you know, see if we get a lot of energy dump right away, because he's really concerned about being able to shoot a snub nose up close and seeing how much real energy dump we get. So we're going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy we get with these at the same time, and then I'm going to hit my 10% clear ballistic test here with 10% clear ballistic blocks. So I'm just going to go into plain clear ballistics, see what our best potential is of those cartridges. So I'm going to do just 110 grain and then 140 grain into plain clear gel from our 2-inch barrel. Then after that, I'm going to do more of a real world simulation where I put on 4 layers of cotton t-shirt on the front of this first 3 inches that represents our pectoral muscle. After that, we're going to have a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard to represent hitting ribs or sternum, and then I'm going to shoot up my steel silhouette to see what kind of practical accuracy I can get from, you know, more practical distances. So let's get started with this test. All right, even though I marked every one of these 110 grains so that I wouldn't mix them up, and somehow I mixed them up. I had some really weird things. I started over with this chronograph session. I'll show that anyways at the end here. I'll put it somewhere. But we had light primer strikes on all of these, but the velocity was all over because it's like somehow I mixed in 2. It's really weird. So all the things I did to prevent that still happened. So here's our 110 grain 4-inch barrel, 1427. I'm going to get a couple reads here with our snub nose with our 110 grain. 1473, 1272, very inconsistent. All right, 140 grain. See what this does in the 4-inch. 1258. It's actually about as low a recoil. 148 grain in our snub here. 140 grain, I mean. 1179. You know, that's a true revolver jam that I just had. It would have fired if I would have pulled through harder, but something was off with that primer backing out or something. That was weird. $11.01 with our 140 grain. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with this gun. It's like the primers are backing out. And I had an issue with the first chronograph run where I had burnt cases, like punctured primers and whatnot. So this ammo is a little bit questionable. Let's our ballistic shell block with these and see how they compare out of the snub. All right, I have every one of my 110 grains marked with marker on the back of these, so I don't get them confused with their 140 grains. So I want to fire a shot here with our 4-inch barrel with our 110 grain. We'll see how fast that's moving, and then I'll do some averages from the snub nose. So here's our 110 grain from about 5 yards from the target. Let's see what this does. 1439. Pretty low recoil. Let's try our snub nose here. Wow, that ain't right. 1444. Wow. Dead primer. That ain't good. All right, I'm going to run one more. This is interesting. The primer impact, even on from my 686, has an extended firing pin. It's a really light strike. And that velocity seemed a little weird, so let me run one more from our 4-inch barrel. See if I can confirm that 1439, I believe it was. 1549, difference there. Yeah, it looks like this primer wasn't even struck. So I'm going to go single action, because when you go single action, it actually brings the hammer back a little bit further, which increases that strike force. So snub nose barrel. See what we get here, 110 grain. $14.49. 13.93. No read. 14.24. Very inconsistent results. A couple of these primers are black, like they've been punctured. Very interesting looking primers that they're burnt like that. Case ejection's fine. And again, you know, it's barely an impact on that primer. Interesting. So here is our 140 grain. Let's get a single shot with our 140 grain here. $12.18, very light recoil, just very, very light, less than the 110. All right, so yeah, I had all these marked. I have the 110 grains marked with pink marker on the back, and somehow I still mixed them up. But I'm gonna go through our plain clear ballistics here with our 110 grain, and we'll see how that compares to our 140. So here's our 110 grain. And our 140 grain. Go take a look. All right, so there's a big difference there in what kind of penetration and energy dump we get in our plain clear ballistics test here. So what we're seeing here is with our 110 grain, we get expansion that dumped that energy to about 14 3/4 inches penetration. Now when we look at our 140 grain, there's more bullet mass there, so it retains more momentum. It goes through the gel block a little bit easier, a little bit more controlled expansion. About 21.5 inches of penetration. Our damage is a little bit greater, it looks like, with the 110 grain up here where it matters, but still pretty similar. So let's put on our fabric and our MDF, because that can change a lot of things, and we'll see how they compare that way. All right, fabric and MDF, more of our real world simulation. 110 grain, let's see what this does. Wow. Let's try 140 now. All right, 140 grain. See how this does. Let's go take a look. All right, so there's definitely a difference here when we look at our expansion. After that first 3 inches, our 110 grain was very big. Our 140, just very mild expansion, controlled expansion. And what we got is a big old energy dump. We have almost the same penetration with that 110 grain and we're looking at about 13 3/4, so that's very adequate. Now with our 140 grain, just like before, we got a little bit over penetration. Looks like probably a ½ inch more or something like that. But what we got here is about 22 inches of penetration with our 140 grain. So looking at this, as far as bullet weights go, I can say that without a question, if you're talking a snub nose up close and personal round, that's going to dump a lot of energy without over penetrating. Absolutely, the 110 grain is where it's at. It's dumping a lot of energy. Our 140 grain is more of a compromise there, where it looks like it'd be a pretty good round for self-defense. It would work just fine. Probably wouldn't over penetrate, but it's a possibility. But still, that really doesn't matter most of the time, because you know, those stories of someone getting hit behind somebody else, that just pretty much never happens. But I can't say that if I was going to carry a round for personal defense, but I was also walking through the woods and there might be a bear that might come out and attack me, I'd rather have that 140 grain. But just straight personal defense, it looks like the 110 grain is doing pretty good. So let me shoot my steel, see what kind of practical shootability I can get with these. All right, 12 yards from the target. You might wonder why I'm wearing this glove. That hole right there should indicate why. Whenever I shoot small frame revolvers and 357 mag, there's always a lot of backblast going on, and my revolver's not out of time, nothing like that. It doesn't happen with my 686 because the grip is so big, my hand is back really far. But with these, for whatever reason, it just comes back and burns me. So I have 110 grains here. I'm going to pull up, get a sight picture, see how quick I can put these on target. So here's our 110 grain. Dead primer, that's not a good thing. And I had that issue in my original chronograph session, where these primers are very, very hard, and I had to go single action to set them off because the hammer wasn't hitting them hard enough. Yep, very, very hard primers. I'll try again. All right, and that second shot, I started to have a locked up action. That never happens, and I'm suspecting that the primers or something like that is at fault here. So here is our 140 grain. Let's see how this does. Locked up revolver. This never happens with other ammo. And revolver can jam, and that's one thing to talk about here. This is actually a revolver jam because the ammo, the primers are backed up. And a lot of people will say, well, if you get a jam revolver, it has to be taken to a gunsmith. No, that's a catastrophic failure. That's not a jam. That can happen to any type of firearm. But what we're seeing here is something with the way that these cases are, the primers. See, if I take these out, these two that I spent, I can just about guarantee you it'll work now. So 2 empties, and then the third one's going to be a shot. So 1, 2. Completely ammo related. So interesting to see that. I'm going to say honestly, between the 140 and the 110 grain, there's not any real difference in felt recoil. They both felt almost identical to me, which is interesting. Let me back up and see if I can keep hitting with these rounds. All right, 25 yards from the target. I have some 110 grains here. So I can do with these. I don't know where that first round went. There's a lot of blast. And a good amount of recoil. It's not unbearable. It doesn't hurt to shoot, but there's a little bit. And here's our 140 grain. All right, so that actually, again, to me, it feels like less recoil. There's way less flash here. So between the two of these, I'm going to say if I had to pick one of these, I would absolutely pick the 140 grain, even though we had a little bit extra of penetration. However, you know, that's 110 grain smacked hard, but it seems like it's kind of a trade-off. It looks like the damage is about the same, just one goes deeper. And the one that goes deeper seemed to shoot more accurately for me with not that much recoil. But all that being said out of the way, I cannot recommend this ammunition whatsoever. I did a chronograph section, and I may or may not put that in the video here. I probably will, because it's something that needs to be seen. I had a misfire on my 686 trying to fire a single round through the chronograph. It looked like the primer had not even been struck. And that Smith & Wesson 686, one of my Patreon supporters a few years ago, sent me an extended new firing pin, so it hits cartridges hard. My leaf spring, my I forget what it's called, right here on that Smith & Wesson is tight, all as tight as it can go. So we have really hard impacts on those primers. Yeah, I had a dead primer. And then in the snub nose, 3 out of 5 were blackened as if they were punctured through the primer with this. Then I had misfires with this where it would not fire, and double action, because you see how far back the hammer comes when you go double action. It doesn't quite hit the frame, or it's still a little ways away from it. But when you go single action, it pushes it back further. You get more inertia on that primer. So I was able to set them off, the ones that wouldn't go off in double action and single action. And then we had backed out primers or something like that where the gun wouldn't rotate. And that's an ammo problem. I haven't had that issue with any other ammo whatsoever in this gun. And considering all the other issues with it, yeah, I'm going to blame the ammo. Because when I took those 2 spents out, it wouldn't rotate. I took them out, boom, boom, boom. Then it rotated. So there's a lot going on, a lot wrong with this ammo. You know, the particular loads themselves are promising. You know, the speeds that we're at and all of that is relatively promising. And it's promising that I don't have any pain in my hand. I have rheumatoid arthritis, so there's not very much recoil. So that's good, but none of it matters because you can't really trust this ammo with the reliability issues we're having here. You know, if you use this in the real world, dead primer, you might get a shot off, then your revolver is jammed. Not good. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.